have been on recess. Today we have one item on the agenda. It's a briefing of the Montgomery MCRS overview of the Fire and Explosive Investigations Unit. As we begin, I'd like to thank Susan Farag for preparing the packet. In this, I did want to mention that this is an in general discussion. We're not going to be speaking about specific cases, but this is an in general discussion. And does anyone on the committee have any opening statements? If not, we're going to turn to Ms. Farag, and she will lead us from there.
Good morning, everyone. This briefing is going to be run primarily by Fire and Rescue to provide all the background information, the regulatory framework for the unit. There are the PowerPoint has been included, and there is also some questions on page 2. One of the ones I wanted to find out was what are the call and case volumes for the unit. They did give me this data, which I've put in front of you, and I will have that added to the staff report as an addendum after the work session. Okay. I'm just going to turn it over to Fire and Rescue.
Very good. Thank you very much. Chief, welcome.
Good morning. Scott Golson with Fire Rescue. With me today, and I'll ask Assistant CAO Earl Stoddard to start off if he wishes.
I'll just say, obviously we're here for a briefing, but I want to say that throughout this briefing, you're going to see some areas where Fire Rescue has identified some places to make some improvements in the programming and the division. And obviously, I'm here to reflect the fact that the county executive is very committed to making those improvements as they lay them out. So I just want to be here for any questions that you may have at that point.
Thank you very much, Dr. Stoddard.
So, Chairman Katz, President Albornoz, and Councilmember Hucker, thank you for the session, the opportunity. The packet, as Susan outlined, goes into, and the slide deck that Charles will go over goes into the background of FEI. Obviously, acronyms is one of our favorite things, so when we use that quickly, some people hear the Facebook, so Fire and Explosive Investigations, or FEI, is the name of the unit. It is one of roughly 24 sections within the large fire rescue organization. Susan has included several pages out of the department org chart on circle 13 through 15, which pinpoints where FEI is in fire rescue underneath special operations, underneath operations division. The unit has a unique mix in its capabilities and its functions, which Charles will get into, as well as a unique history and the means of why it was and how it was developed. Also with us today is State Fire Marshal Brian Dracy in the audience.
Welcome. Thank you for being here.
Brian is a alum of Montgomery County Fire Rescue prior to moving on to the State Fire Marshal's office, and was a part of this unit in its inception, as well as for a great period of time before his first retirement. So Brian is here. So Charles, if you have any questions now, or I'll pass to Charles and ask him to go ahead and start off.
Please.
Good morning. If we'll advance the show one slide. I think it's important, before we get into any great detail about fire explosives investigations, and unfortunately I'm probably going to call it like 3 or 4 different things while we go through this, I think we have to talk first about how incredibly difficult arson and explosions are to solve, especially in the absence of witnesses, video evidence, and that sort of thing. And I will argue that part of that, or the primary part of that, is that fire consumes, and as part of that consumption, it consumes evidence. Explosions distribute, and even in the case of fire, what evidence isn't consumed by the fire is often distributed by the very hose streams we use to suppress the fire. So these are incredibly difficult. And then what's left has this thin film of sooty particulates deposited all over it from the combustion processes. So again, I want to highlight that difficulty, and to say that, and to highlight this one case of Thomas Sweat, the DC arsonist. When they arrested him, after chasing for years with a large and federal joint task force, he was charged with 45 fires and later tied to 350. And that's even with like the full weight of the federal government and local governments taking them down or chasing them down. So if we look at the slide deck, what does our unit do? It has two core functions. One is, ooh,
Wow.
all right. One, test,
Yeah,
test.
it's-
Okay, I'm good. I'm good? All right.
Well, maybe a little bit. Now try it, please, Joe.
Test 1, 2, 3, 4, 6.
We're good.
Okay. So they have two core functions. One's about fires, where they investigate the cause and the origin of fires. So how did it start and where did it start? And unlike a lot of places, because it is a law enforcement agency, once they've made those determinations, they're able to carry the investigation themselves from the beginning all the way through, up to and including the prosecution. The other big part they do for us, and we'll talk about this a little bit later when we talk about gaps or weaknesses, is that they help me to determine trends in fires. And that's for the purposes of improving our outreach efforts and other prevention efforts. So then the second part is this notion of explosive devices. Again, they are capable of handling an explosive investigation from the beginning all the way to the prosecution, and that's kind of important. And when we talk about the history of how we got to where we are, we'll see where that's more important. So let's switch to the history, which would require advancing one. This unit started January 1st, 1998. The chief architect of this transition or the creation of this unit in its current configuration has joined us today. Puts it just under 25 years old. The context of how it started and how it came to develop these police powers, for lack of a better word, and adding that bomb component are kind of important. And in the late 90s, what we saw was the addition of police powers and this whole law enforcement piece. What drove that? And I think if we switch to the next slide, we see that they were driven by two important factors. The need to have police powers was driven by the fact that two of our arson investigators were assaulted in the process of doing their job. And then this notion of needing to incorporate this explosives piece is because before that, the state fire marshal's office handled the explosive investigations. And what you see in the early 90s is the use of explosives as a weapon. You see this in the World Trade Center, the first World Trade Center, Oklahoma City, and then I think that one in Atlanta at the Olympics, that one kind of shifted the balance. That was a little bit scarier. It was like this lone actor, and he was putting his devices in these otherwise innocuous places. So while the bombings weren't happening in Montgomery County, you would have noticed that much like when the powder calls started, when people anthrax at the Capitol, we ran hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, and me personally, hundreds of powder calls. Same thing happens when there's bombings anywhere in the country. People start to get nervous, and the backpack or the odd object at the bus stop that I would normally walk past, well, now we're calling somebody, see something, say something. What makes it a really big deal is that the state fire marshal's office, they're trying to cover an entire state. And we started to see incidences where we were shutting down the Wheaton Plaza or other businesses for hours on end, waiting for a response from the state fire marshal. It's not that they were unresponsive, it's that their resources were stretched really thin. Couple of people here in the county, through the legislative process, made a move in Annapolis and got ourselves a bomb squad and got police powers for our fire investigators to address the two problems we see here. The next slide is just an excerpt from a newspaper article from the Frederick Post that again highlights, the rationale for going after our own bomb squad. It is important to be able to reduce the amount of disruption to the community. And even as things stand today, I wouldn't dare speak for the state, but I don't believe that they're in a position to do that for us. It's important for us to maintain that capacity ourselves.
Do other counties, are there other counties that have a bomb squad?
Yes, so when we go to the next slide,
Okay,
that was a prescient question.
yeah, there you go.
Thank you. Montgomery County Fire Rescue is one of 6 agencies in the state of Maryland. This is important, and I'll keep reinforcing it because I have to own part of the things I'm going to tell you are wrong. It took me a minute to figure out this is a separate police agency. I've worked here for 31 years, and for about 30 of them, I always saw this tie between MCPD and FEI, and that while they are sister agencies, they are separate agencies. So that's something that just really settled into my mind. So we're one of those 6, you can see them there in the state. Each one is a separate agency, and you see that in the state listing of police agencies if you were to go to that website.
Mr. Katz, to add to your question pertaining to bomb squad,
Right.
the national trend or the heavy predominance of squads across the country are law enforcement based. In Maryland, the history is that was a fire function. The state fire marshal's office was a standalone unit at the state government level from its inception until a few years ago when it was transitioned and brought into the MSP or Maryland State Police arena. So the vast number of squads across the country are LE, law enforcement, with a very small number being fire-based. And as on Circle 6, these units here are, with the exception of Hagerstown, are both independent law enforcement agencies for the investigations of fire and arson events, as well as FBI certified response squads for hazardous devices.
All right, so if we'll continue to the next one, next slide. Right now, we have an authorized strength of 13. We do have 2 vacancies, and if my numbers don't add up, I beg you to just look past that. We have 1 support person who is a certified fire investigator, but he is not law enforcement. How do they become law enforcement? Well, they all go through the Montgomery County Police Academy. They go through the we make the selection. They go through all the other Montgomery County Police Academy processes, psychological evaluations, physical evaluations, background checks, and that sort of thing. And then the unit works in coordination with the MCPD on certain cases. I'm sure the certain cases will come back up later, so we're prepared for that. If we'll go to the next slide, I did my level best to pretend that I was a lawyer and could actually read codes and bills and those sorts of things. And I assembled what I believe to be a good collection of codes and bills. There is someone who went to law school who can find some other things, but I think this tells the story enough. Legislation was passed at the state level that gave our Fire and Explosives Investigations Unit powers commensurate with the Maryland State Fire Marshal for the purposes of explosions and fires and that sort of thing. They have been since updated, and what's really important is that because they are a police agency, now things like the Police Accountability Board and those other recent law changes do apply to them. So, when we talk about switching slides, I'm sorry, we're not going to linger here a lot. This was absolutely mind-boggling in preparation for today, to dig deep into what it is that we ask of these investigators. We asked them to do about 700 hours of work to spin up. Certainly, if someone wants to know how much or how long each one of these classes are, we can certainly do that. But I think the most prescient or important thing is on the right-hand side, where we say it takes, just for the fire explosives and bomb stuff, it takes about 300 hours a year to maintain that. And that's a pretty steep burden. When we talk later, I don't want you to lose track of, we're asking a lot of these folks, and there may be some better ways to think about that.
As a tie to that training component, these members had achieved the rank of lieutenant in fire rescue prior to being eligible for selection for the unit. So they've got 12 to 15 years in MCFRS. They've progressed through those ranks and have been promoted to lieutenant. That is the base level of rank to apply to any one of the 12 sworn positions in the unit. And then, as Charles outlined, they get selected. They go through the entire police recruit vetting process by MCPD. Then they sit for the 6 months of the police academy, and then complete a field training officer program, and at that point get their Maryland Police Training Commission certification. That, in addition, so that's the time before this slide starts on Circle 9. And then, as a part of Susan's question, these folks do meet and go through the MCPD research and in-service training arenas on a regular basis. So this was the FEI-specific training, and they're doing both the annual research that they need for fire department, as well as the annual research on the law enforcement side.
So here we get to the meat. Here we get to the meat of things. We have strengths, and because it's an organization populated by people, that means that there's probably some weaknesses there too. And I want to highlight that things have happened that have brought this unit to the forefront, and the council's asking questions, and they want to be briefed. And in the absence of that, this unit probably would not have received the amount of scrutiny from me that it's received lately. It was not high on my list of priorities. I just came to operations from Human Resources a little over a year ago, and there were things I were interested in. Still dealing with COVID, but I was really interested in learning EMS, the emergency medical side, the overwhelming percentage of what we do. And when I was over there learning EMS, I learned some really good things. That is a strong team. And they started teaching me about data, not just as an idea, not just as a catchphrase, but as a way to bring value to the citizens of Montgomery County, the community that is Montgomery County. And they started teaching me some other ways to think about things. And I'm flabbergasted. These are some smart folks. It was my intent to start bringing those ideas and applying them to fire engines and ladder trucks and other things, not just the ambulances. The fire and explosives investigations was going to be on the list, but not this early. And the reason why, I think, is when you look at this unit, it's about to turn 25 years old, and they have done a magnificent job. There have been no complaints that we know of, but yes. So generally, we've been complaint-free for 25 years. They've done some big cases. including the Discovery Building and the tunnel events in Bethesda. And they've worked closely with the State Fire Marshal's Office. They participated in firefighter line of duty death investigations in Frederick and Howard counties as part of that team. They have worked closely with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. And we even supported Baltimore City when they had the triple line of duty death. And I say it that way to say that part of what we do, and I think you have seen this over your collective tenures in council, is we always go back and look at what we have and try to update what we have in the context of what we know today. And just because we built the team yesterday doesn't mean that that configuration is right for today's context. So with that spirit of discussion laid out, beyond question, we have a strong, deep bench of investigative experience. Those guys are good at what they do. And the same thing holds true with explosives. But all those things, and you saw how many hours a year it takes to recertify, all those things require like this deep expertise. The greatest benefit, I think, is that they have sufficient relationships with the state and with our two primary federal partners to pick up the phone and ask for help and get that help pretty quickly. And any of you who, I think you were all at the explosion on Littonsville Road, and you will see that the ATF was there probably around the same time as county resources. And that's not a testament to me, that's a testament to the unit's ability to develop and maintain relationships. If we switch sides, we get to the harder part. We talk about the weaknesses. So if we could advance one. Insufficient oversight, and I would argue that insufficient oversight was more than sufficient until the world started to change and you started to see legislative changes primarily related to the police, and we started having conversations about reimagining. And then we have these Tuesday meetings of the Criminal Justice Coordinating Commission, which I attend, and I always kind of wonder why I attended, and now I know it's because I run this really small police agency in the state of Maryland, and I listened to all the conversation about the accountability board and the portal, and it all washed over me, and that's a problem. I got to get that fixed. And we're going to get that fixed, right? So when we talk about insufficient oversight, it's not that the team that's doing the work is just doing whatever they want. It's that I have a lot to learn. Law enforcement has underseen some rapid changes. It's not an investigative failure. This is not causing us to lose court cases. When we talk about poor administrative support, well, in line with the admission I just made, it's safe to say that if I didn't fully comprehend one part, I probably didn't comprehend all the other parts. And man, I start looking, and it is clear that, you know, for 13 investigators, there needs to be some sort of administrative support. They generate a lot of paperwork, they generate a lot of case files, and we have to do a better job managing those. And it's really hard to be your own administrative support while you're investigating. And what was not included in that slide about how many hours they spend recertifying, that's just the law enforcement stuff. They have to do some work for me, for the fire department as well. When it comes to poorly articulated policy and direction, it is clear that I missed the boat on the police accountability stuff. It is clear that we're not included in that portal, and that has got to get fixed very, very quickly. And it is clear that as this agency, we have got to do a better job articulating what the expectation is and what the limits are for this agency, especially in light of where we sit today. And then the last area, it's nothing dramatic. If you had asked me, I keep saying this, but it's true, if you had asked me 2 years ago, is FEI putting out good stats? I'm like, yeah, they keep their dashboard up to date. Now that I've been taught a little bit something about oh my Lord, we could tie e-justice into the fire app. E-justice is the police record management system, fire apps, fire department's records management system. They can be made to speak to one another. There are better ways to capture data. And then if we start talking about this other big piece, one of the hallmarks of equity, which I think has been one of the biggest things, that we've heard recently, is this notion of disaggregating data, which is really hard when you spent the first 30 years of your career aggregating it, right? So now we're talking about disaggregating. So we have been having conversations with our IT teams, our data teams, public health, others, how do we do that? And it's not just as simple as asking different questions or presenting things a little bit differently. It's about restructuring the way we gather and disseminate data. So if you ask me about poor data management, I would probably make that assessment for the vast majority of the things we do in my division, except for EMS, because they do a great job with data management, and we're trying to catch up. So if we switch to the next slide, what are we going to do about this? I think we have to take a deep breath and make sure that we're not overreacting or throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We have a squad that has been functioning at a high level for 25 years. And yes, it doesn't matter to me personally. They were going to get some scrutiny. We're in the middle of a deployment study. There are some, not equity, but diversity issues. We have to figure out what's the barrier, why is that unit so homogenous? How do we fix that? Just at the same time, we're trying to fix that throughout the enterprise. So as we look towards fixing the weaknesses or bolstering up the places where we're weak, we just have to be careful not to overreact and to apply deliberate processes so that we bring the right value to the community without inadvertently reducing value because I was short-sighted. So we're going to continue to review our operations. We have plans in place to update the policy deficiencies that we talked about. We don't believe that that's going to take too long. I have some conversations to have about the police accountability piece. The next step in this mid-range piece is what's the right supervision? I'm probably not it, given my lack of law enforcement expertise. There was a time when we had a battalion chief who was also law enforcement. Do we need to bring that back? I think, again, I point back to this notion of being very, very deliberate. So I'm not telling you what the answer is. I'm telling you that how we're thinking. And then I think in terms of the far term, we need to go back to the central notion of this entire discussion. And that's the fact that FEI is a part of fire rescue, and fire rescue believes that it's a learning organization. And we are focused on continuous self-evaluation and self-improvement. And you see this. We are undergoing yet another deployment study to make sure that our resources are aligned as efficiently as possible. And as I've said before, sessions like this one have brought this one aspect of what we do to the forefront, and it's only right that we apply the same deliberative processes to determining the ideal configuration of this unit. The context in which it was created may have shifted, and that may necessitate a change in how we do business. It's going to take more than a couple seconds to figure out exactly how to do that. The good news is, as we go through that process, we've engaged the county attorney, we've engaged law enforcement partners. The state fire marshal came today. He was consulted before we had this discussion, and we continue to leverage our discussions and partnerships with the county police because that's going to be a critical piece moving forward, is making sure that whatever we do is in line and kind of closely tailored to our relationship with the county police. So with that, I think I've answered the questions, and I'll defer.
Well, First, Susan, couldn't tell whether or not you wanted to speak or not, do you?
I'll just add one thing right here, is that it would be helpful to understand this timeline in terms of budget development for FY '24, what resources and staffing that the department may need in order to augment services or provide better oversight. So I was just wondering, is anything ramping up for FY '24? Is this something that the committee might want to bring back right before the operating budget?
The answer is, I believe, I'm going to speak for the committee without hearing from them, but both of them can hit me from both sides if I say something wrong. I do believe we need to bring it back. And my first question was very similar to yours, is not only how fast can we get some answers, but whether or not you have the resources to evaluate it at this point, not just saying what we need at, once you have those conversations, but do we have the resources to be able to evaluate it as quickly as we can?
I do believe that is what the collaboration between Chief Jones and myself, Assistant Chief Dahm is here, and Marcus, Amy, Charles, and I have been meeting regularly on the review, the analysis, helping Charles and I understand and learn the nature of the small police agency as it is, the opportunities, and it talks about the ranges here on the slide, and your question, Mr. Katz, and Susan's. It is our plan, and Earl alluded to the CE's support, it is our plan to have an adjustment in the near future, in '23, and indeed there will be, and is very likely, a continuation of that in our '24 submission and budget as we go forward, and we're looking at those near and mid-range, meaning '23 and '24. Clearly, the FAR term is beyond the next budget year. The resources to evaluate, the second part of your question, I do believe we do. As an organization, as a county, I believe we have those resources. With the conjunction of the State Fire Marshal's Office and Brian and his team and all of the folks within MCPD, we have those resources. What Charles outlined is, while he was self-critical of himself, I had his seat before he, and I was not aware of the unique nature of the Fire Investigations Unit in MCFRS. So we're learning. And we have learned a lot in short order as we've been working on the history of FEI and these gaps. And by all means, I believe the county, as well as our support organizations, have the resources to do that evaluation.
Good, thank you. And I hate to use the expression "hold your feet to the fire" here, but
Applicable.
what would be a fair timeline? If we said we would like the committee to come back in 90 days, is that fair for you to be able to give us an update? Is it going to take longer than 90 days? How is that going to work? I mean, I think we need to have a time frame, if possible.
Time frames are very important. Obviously, it holds our feet to the fire.
Literally.
The opportunity, and I have no gas to the 90 days. If,
Okay.
as Assistant CAO Stoddard outlined, we can come back to the committee at the beginning of January or the very end of December, based upon timing. And
Well, we're off in December anyhow, so it'd be mid-January.
we hold your feet to the fire. We can have you in
I'll be
December.
back, but yeah, go ahead.
But no, we can be back in 90 days with an update.
Okay.
By far, and provide you information. That'll be a preview of what may be in our '24 discussions and what may be with us in '24.
And for the Police Accountability Board, you mentioned the board a couple times. This organization is under the Police Accountability Board, is that correct?
I'm not educated enough to answer your
Well,
question.
I can see over your head, and I'm getting very educated by a head shake. So.
We, as a police agency, we must comply with these rules. What I'm struggling with is, are they under that board? I'm still
Did you want to
learning.
come forward and
Yes.
speak? Did you want to, please?
As Brian will come forward.
Yes, please, Brian.
And the way I would like to answer that, Mr. Katz, is, yes, we are. The portal today, as designed by us, by MC Gov, does not have that as a unit
I
listing.
understood that.
That's where we're saying no, but the answer is
And how fast can you
statutory
correct
is
that?
a yes.
I guess we have to do that internally.
correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Welcome and thank you for being here.
Yeah.
And thank you for allowing us to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no problem. Obviously, all the fire investigation units across the state who have the law enforcement authority, such as Montgomery County, fall under those new rules that came out of Annapolis, but now 2 years ago. So that would be the accountability board, the review complaints and all that, things of that nature, body worn cameras, all that is, if you're a law enforcement, you gotta do it, so. So, they need to work with the county police and work with that and put those policies in place as Charles has talked about, and redoing those policies and having that in place for the fire side of the house.
Thank you. Susan, any idea how fast we can have it in the portal or?
I'll check with Dr. Stoddard because he's.
Well, I guess I should have turned to that side. Dr. Stoddard was quiet there, so.
I was just waiting for a break in the action to.
Yeah, okay, all right.
So it's very easy to add them to the portal. I would only point out, though, that as is in state law, there is some grandfathering that occurred with certain agreements. And so I believe the IAFF agreement runs through the end of this fiscal year, which would mean that they are still likely to fall under the LEOBR, the Law Enforcement Officers Bill of Rights, until July 1st of 23, at which point those complaints will move over. But we can add them to the portal because the portal really is just a complaint mechanism, and so the complaints will go through the LEOBR process. Until that point, they won't actually go to the Police Accountability Board and to the Administrative Charging Committee until the current labor agreement expires at the end of this fiscal year.
Thank you. Yes, Chief.
The FRS investigators are not covered by LEOBR.
Then they're gonna go to the pad then, okay?
Right.
Okay, so then obviously go and see, we're learning all these things. So we can have them added to the portal this week, that's not a problem.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Yeah, I had a couple.
Please.
Well, first, thank you very much for this presentation, and as I say often, you learn something new every 5 minutes in this job, which is what I enjoy the most about it. Chief Bailey, you mentioned that these cases are difficult to solve, which I can certainly understand. In looking at the numbers and trends, I mean, we're going back up again. I mean, we were at 201 as of July, and so are you concerned that obviously the numbers were low during COVID when presumably things were shut down, people weren't out as often, but are we seeing trends and increases that we should be concerned about?
Where I'm concerned is that the way we're capturing and disseminating data makes it hard for me to know is if the trends you're seeing are of statistical significance. Right? So my instinct is not that things are catching on fire more often here, but in the absence of a really rigid and codified way to capture and transmit data, it is really easy to see a shift in thing being classified as one thing here and another thing there. And that's one of the things we're talking about, is building the structures that allow for better data management. We do see surges. There were surges in activity associated with, Supreme Court hearings or activities in other places. You see ups and you see downs. We've taken a look at a couple of maps. It would appear that the bulk of our activity is the same as it is everything else. 495, 270, off a little bit with some aberrations in other places. So I'm not ready to say that we have a fire problem. I'm ready to say that in the presence of better data, I could give better answers. So we're structured.
That's helpful. And to be continued, I get that. So this council recently passed legislation for a pilot program for more security cameras, which I would assume are helpful in terms of just investigations in general. and acknowledging the data is not perfect. And I assume there's probably a geographic spread of where these fires are occurring or where some of these investigations are occurring, but I have to believe, they're more concentrated in more densely populated areas. This just, to me, adds another benefit to the pilot security camera program for people that don't already have access to them. We're hoping to increase access to those cameras, and I'd be interested to see if there is something we can do there on the education side, on the prevention side, to encourage our public to sign up for this program, to make them aware of it, because this is yet another, in my opinion, reason why somebody should consider getting that kind of a camera. So, Dr. Stoddard, I'm actually going to turn to you on this one, because I know this crosses over, and you were very helpful in the development of that particular bill. But any thoughts on what more we can do on the prevention side, since this obviously does cross over into law enforcement, and then any of the chiefs who want to mention that as well?
Yeah, I do think, obviously, with regard to the camera program, as you began with, obviously, that was not funded in FY, right, with part of the bill, and so obviously that is something that would need to be identified as a mechanism to proceed. I don't believe there's going to be savings within the police department that would cover that sufficiently at this point. But I do think, obviously, the collaboration that you're seeing between Montgomery County Police Department and Fire Rescue will be valuable in terms of the operation for FRS, but also in a broader sense. Now, I will say, and I think this was exemplified in the earlier arson investigation related to the church fires that we had earlier this year, there is very good collaboration. Both that case was largely broken by someone coming forward with an eyewitness account, but they had cameras and video. They had units in the area responding to the fire who provided information that was corroborative to help solve the investigation. And so obviously I think there is a good system in place, but obviously the more that we have both technology, people coming forward as witnesses. This is the same in the law enforcement space. We have some reluctance within certain communities, and I guess that goes to the Police Accountability Board, because we're trying to build trust and transparency, which I think will get more people willing to participate in the prevention and accountability process in the reporting process. And so I do think there's a lot there that can be done. And we've had great success within the use of technology in the prevention space in law enforcement with environmental changes. Those include both additional cameras, not just personal cameras, but deployable cameras. Similarly, we've had great work with license plate readers to help identify stolen cars or cars that have been involved in criminal conduct. Could include arsons and other investigations related to that. And also things like physical improvements in lighting will also reduce crime opportunities if there are places that are particularly concerned. The better lit they are, the less likely you are to see them be victims of crime, including arson.
And President Albornoz, as you outlined an example and referred to the Bethesda Church incidents, just 2 weeks ago, the tragic fire on Orchard Ridge Drive in Gaithersburg, there was a lot of neighborhood and adjacent structures with residential ring or residential style cameras that, as a joint effort between the collision reconstruction unit and the fire investigations section, worked through and got that information, saw that, and were able to then identify and use that to create part of that investigative picture, no doubt. When you look at that chart as we provided you, when we give you numbers, fire, EMS, and other, you ask us what might be the other. When you look at that chart and you see fire, explosive, and other, I'm forecasting a question of what is the other. So indeed, fires are the house fire, the shed fire, the unknown fire, the outside fire, the whatever that is. It's a fire incident. That's what categorizes into the main heading of fire there. Explosive incidents, self-explanatory. It's something that is a detonating or improvised device. The other is where some things get lumped together. A person gets burned. and is burned by cooking, burned by a flame, that is a element in which this unit does have an investigative and documentary role. That would be in one of the other categories. Assisting another law enforcement agency or assisting another agency for an investigation, that's in the other category. So when you ask President Albernas about the trending of incidences, it's not something that we have that feeling yet or the knowledge to say that they're trending up. It's a opportunity for us to dig and look, and as well identify that there's an opportunity for the folks when we get there and Johnny says, yep, I was cooking on the stove, I left the stove and I went out of the structure and now the kitchen was on fire. You know, the fire investigator does not come to that. When the same kitchen fire occurs and it's nothing that provides us the ability to identify that it was unattended cooking inside the structure, a fire investigator likely does go to that and identifies, you know, the likely origin as unattended cooking or appliance malfunction in the kitchen area. So there is a unique blend and hybrid in how that drives the data. Hope that was helpful.
Thanks. Good morning. Thanks so much. I agree. It's a very educational briefing. Thanks for being here and putting this together. I'm amazed, and I know we've seen this before, but by the number of investigations every year. And it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot interesting, but the number of fires tends to stay around the same. It seems like the last 5 years, but explosives goes up and down. Have you ever drawn any conclusions about why that happens significantly?
Sometimes a guy, and I think we have to be careful when we talk about it because we don't give people ideas, right?
Yeah, sure.
But sometimes a person gets an idea and he's got a couple of friends and they execute the idea for a while. It turns into a thing. God forbid it gets on TikTok, I think they call
Copycat,
it.
yeah.
And next thing you know, right, so we end up with problems like that in terms of like the greater, because that, you know, it's kind of what we were kind of dealing with this summer to a greater or lesser extent. If you want to talk about trends writ large, then I would certainly defer to the expert to my left.
I think Chief Bailey mentioned earlier, I mean, when we see a bombing incident occurring somewhere or an explosive event that occurs somewhere across the United States, the calls go up, the number of packages. And we're happy for that because we want people to make that phone call. You know, because it might be a real device, it might be a real something in the package. So we're not disgruntled to that at all. We want people to make that call, see something, say something. But that's typically when we see those things increase, is when there's something on the news and everybody says, oh, you know, now I'm more aware, and I'm going to call it in, and that's what generates that call.
But to be clear on that, it is not necessarily something that actually exploded.
Correct.
It's that someone was concerned that something could explode.
Correct. It's a
which is a big
suspicious
difference.
package. It's, you know, something I got something in the mail. I mean, this is a very target-rich county. You're well aware of that. It was target-rich when I was here, you know, 20-something years ago.
Right.
Most of the people that work in high-level jobs downtown live here. And we get calls for those houses all the time, you know, back in the day, and they still do today. So, you know, anything that's out of the norm for them, they're going to make a phone call, which we expect them to do. And that's what takes the calls up on the explosive side. So that's why you see that.
So just a harmless, suspicious package goes in.
Correct.
Good. I think that'll be reassuring to everybody. And if there's one of these called in, like we have 18 federal agencies, if one gets called in at FDA, is that in this number if you're assisting, or do they have their own police to?
No, it would be in that number because we're the primary.
You get called first.
It would be the primary, Montgomery, yes, would be the primary unit called because obviously that's the bomb squad responsibility to.
And anyway, I should say, Brian, thank you for coming back home here.
see
It's
him.
very good
We see him from time
very good to see you.
I
Yeah.
live in the county.
I was going to say, we
I know. It's good to see you without a tragedy.
Yeah, well, that's true, too, sir.
Right, that's sometimes when I see you. I just had a question about the timeline that you might be best positioned to answer. So the slide 3 says the police powers were added in 97, 98. Slide 6 says there's authorizing legislation in 04. There may have been more than one I'm not quibbling, more than one law, I get that. If those powers emerged roughly 20 years ago or so, and still here we are all this time later, there's only 6 jurisdictions in Maryland that have the sort of setup that we have, and only 3 of those are large counties. What do all the other large jurisdictions do that have these kind of numbers to contend with? How are they structured?
They're structured the same. Some of them don't have bomb squads. I mean, I know you mentioned earlier, but the bomb squads, and in fact, I hate to tell you this, but we just took over Baltimore City. The state fire marshal did, because all their bomb techs retired.
Wow.
And as of June, they called me up and said, July 1st, you got it. And it's like, wait a minute. But we're doing it. And,
But Baltimore County, Frederick, Howard?
Baltimore County has a squad. Baltimore County fire side of the house, the fire investigations are in the police department. It's a little different there. It was a joint unit. Baltimore City is joint, it's fire police. But the rest of the larger jurisdictions in the National Capital Region have their own fire investigation units. They have their law enforcement authority. One of the units that wasn't up there was Ocean City. They have their own authority and a bomb squad as well.
Did, Chief, you say earlier that Maryland's sort of an outlier in this area? That other states aren't structured this way?
When you go east of the Mississippi River, more of the bomb squad are in the fire investigation units. On the west side, it's more law enforcement, just the way it was many, many, many years ago.
What's seen by national experts as the best practice?
I don't think there is a best practice. We all train under one set of parameters. We all go to the same school for bomb school. So, I can be a bomb tech here and still do the same thing in California because the procedures are all the same that we're learning from the FBI down in Huntsville, Alabama. So, they're all certified, and as the chief mentioned, and you saw it there, they get recertified every 3 years. They go back to Huntsville and get recertified and maintain that bomb tech certification. So, it's nothing really different other than that, is that, we can all do the same job. And I'll have to tell you that, the fire investigation units here, it's a very small group. And that's why we rely on each other. You see us come here to help you, and we call them to help us, in Baltimore City and everything else. So it's a small group of people, including the folks from ATF that we work with very well. But we rely on each other. And when I was here, and I think they still do, is, you have to use all those available resources. We're too small to do it by ourselves sometimes. We all meet together. We get together as a group. The unit commanders we get together regularly and try to meet and talk to things. With regards to stats, Mr. President, I'll tell you that overall the arson numbers are going down across the state. For the last several years, we're on a downward trend. We continue to be on a downward trend for the last, 5 years now, that we see that throughout the state of Maryland. So don't see that many arsons, thank God. Because it's a very powerful weapon, and once it's unleashed, it gets out of control. When it hurts, it kills a lot of people, as you well know. So I think, like the chief said, these guys do a great job. There was, Charles talks about the time when things got started with our police powers and the bomb squad. Obviously, there were investigators way before that. When the first code was written, Chapter 22, and the Montgomery County Fire Code was written, it was written in there that, the fire department would have the responsibility to investigate all fires in the county. So there were investigators back then, but they could only enforce the fire-related arson laws. And that's when we went to Annapolis. When the state fire marshal's office went to the MSP, they were originally under the Department of Corrections and Public Safety. When they went to MSP, that's when they got those law enforcement, and that's what drove all the other units to go to Annapolis to get that part. And like Chief Bailey said, and it was under my watch, we were having investigators assaulted on the scene, and we couldn't do anything. We couldn't make the arrest, because we didn't have the authority to make an arrest of guys, beating on one of my guys. They had knives put on them, and we were carrying weapons back then. We'd have to get a gun permit and qualify. We still went through the police academy back then, and but it was needed. It was needed to protect us and have that. And again, do that whole gamut of things now. They can charge for, the arson, the burglary, whatever else associated crimes are all enumerated. They can do that now, and it's streamlined a lot to get that authority back then, and it took a lot to get it. There was several sessions before it happened. For us, Prince George's, we were the first ones, and then Anne Arundel came on, Ocean City, and a few others. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it does, thank you. And just finally, I know the substantive recommendations will come next briefing, but can you give us any kind of sneak preview about the direction you're headed to address the insufficient oversight, and particularly the poorly articulated policy that you flagged?
I think I reached for the button too soon. Could you repeat your?
Sure. You've identified insufficient oversight and poorly articulated policy, administrative support we probably know what to do about, and data management. Can you give us a sneak preview at all of like the direction you're headed about how to address those?
So I have to be fair. We have not had any conversations with labor, and I think it'd be inappropriate to just lay it bare here without having at least some preliminary discussions with them. But in terms of policy, we're moving forward to draft what we know we need and then put it into the sort of policy pipeline. Because we can't just write a new rule tomorrow, right? It involves some discussion with the labor. So we're in the process of writing those. We don't think that's going to take too long. There's examples that we can use, right? But in terms of the oversight, we still have some thinking to do about the right oversight. Depends on the way the unit's structured and what's the right structure for the unit. And do we do a temporary, do we do something now to kind of tide us over and then do something more final later? I don't know the answer to that, but we certainly will here in short order,
Does it include any additional partnership with other public safety agencies that have investigated there?
We are strengthening. Partnership's a big deal. We've heard the message from our bosses loud and clear. We are always looking for ways to, right? So our partnership with the Montgomery County Police Department, it's getting better, right? And then it was never bad. Just like the family reunion, there's this cousin, It's better. Like, we are talking to each other. I never had the occasion to talk to the police captain, because police captains are a big deal, not like fire captains, but like big deal police captain, about these sorts of things. And we're having these conversations now. I'm learning a lot. I've learned a lot in the past 90 days. My mind is still kind of jello and gelatinous. I've been on the phone with him and other members of his team trying to figure out what's right and what's the history and how did we get to where we are. So I can't give you a sneak preview, as depressing as that is, because I love trading in early view secrets, except to say that I'm spending an inordinate amount of time trying to figure this thing out so that when we come back here, I guess in 90 days, I was hoping for at least 100, but we come back in 90 days, that I have something substantive to share with you without, being offensive to my labor partners.
Sure. Okay, great. Very helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And my only other question, and I know we put you on the spot enough, but let's do it one more time for you. The fact that you've taken over Baltimore City, did they give you any extra resources, and what does that do to the rest of the state?
No.
They did not give you any extra resources.
No, their bomb squad kind of went defunct. Their 3 officers retired earlier this year, and the last tech just retired in the end of July. So we've taken on that role. The responses aren't that bad. We've asked the FBI to try to push. We had 5 vacancies on our bomb squad. We've identified those 5 folks, and we've asked the FBI to try to expedite us getting down to the training to get them back. because of this. The thing that's taking most of our time are the special events. We got to cover the NFL games. We got to cover the Orioles games. We got to cover Fleet Week, which we're there right now, covering both on the ground and on the water. Because my bomb squad is one of only 4 that has a maritime capability. I can do stuff in the water that other squads can't do. So we're in the water. You know, I have guys that dive and handle explosives in the water as well. So you talk about the training hours. Those guys have double the training hours because of the maritime component that they have to do. So, but yeah, we're managing it. We're managing it, and we're Baltimore County has a couple folks, we can rely on them to come over and help us in the city, you know, so, but it's a stretch that we've reached out. I know we've reached out to some of the Montgomery guys to cover some of the games and some of the other stuff. It's just a matter of how we get that overtime covered and those types of things. And so we're dealing with all that stuff, but.
It has to be a concern, you know.
It is, and at some point, hopefully they're going to restructure and get back into the game. We just don't know when that's going to happen, so.
Anything else, Chiefs or Susan, did you have anything else? Anything from the committee? Thank you all very, very much for what you do beyond the briefing, which was truly interesting and eye-opening for us. But thank you very much for what you do. I know you're never thanked as much as you should be, but we certainly do appreciate you. And with that, we are going to adjourn. Thank you very much.